Buddhist Science is a study on Buddhism based on facts and science.
The Suttas describing on the Buddha's enlightenment by Venerable Rungruang Papatsaro, Dr. Rungruang Limchoopatipa. All the Buddha's teachings are based on the discovery of the Buddha on the truths of life within nature on the day of his enlightenment. What happened in the day of the Buddha enlightenment at the Bodhi tree was as follows.
The Buddha resorts to a secluded resting place. The forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, a heap of straw.
The story of the Buddha's enlightenment began like this. After several years of the Buddha performing various schools of practices, especially the extremist of torturing the body to yield the sin. Although these practices may receive respects from most of the people, but the Buddha found that there were no signs of any significant success. So, the Buddha decided to change his strategy by stopping torturing the body and returning to live in normal life, and the Buddha called this way of life, a principle of the middle way of living, that is, in performing the Buddhist practice, one should be in neither making life to be too suffering nor making life to be too joyful, however one should balance the way of living with nature. In accord to the Buddha's story, he reminded of the special quality of mindfulness breathing during his childhood. Then he realized that by having a mindfulness, one could follow the breathing throughout the whole breathing process. Then he applied the mindfulness throughout the meditation. Thus the mindfulness was empowered to be used in an insight observation. The discovery of the special function of high-quality mindfulness and its application in observing mental phenomena was a significant breakthrough in Buddhism. This was the origination of the Buddhist cognitive process to gain an insight wisdom for the first time to the world. Prior to the day of the Buddha's enlightenment, the practice of meditation was quite well known among anchorite. However, none of them had ever developed an insight for the enlightenment yet. This is because the traditional meditation can only force the mind into an absorption. The mind could be calm, and a practitioner may earn some sorts of meditation powers, but not an enlightenment. As a matter of fact, the Buddha was the first one who developed a special technique to improve the quality of mindfulness by performing the meditation on focusing on a merit subject, and thus improving the mindfulness quality. In this technique the Buddha maintained a state of mindfulness throughout the meditation as stated, performing meditation with mindfulness in front, then passing through an absorption, and finally the mindfulness was developed into a purified mindfulness which was a type of high-quality mindfulness for performing an insight observation. This Buddhist meditation was later called a mindfulness meditation as comparing to the conventional mantra meditation. In the mantra meditation, it is performed by repeating a short sacred word again and again for a long period of time. This sort of hypnotizing practice will bring a mind into a one-pointedness state of mind. While in the mindfulness meditation, the Buddha suggested to have a mindfulness reviewing in a Buddha teaching or reminding of whatever merit that had done. This process would bring the mindfulness to a one-pointedness state of mind as well. However, by doing so, the mindfulness would be empowered into a higher quality, so that this mindfulness could be used in an insight observation. Generally, in Buddhist practice, the term meditation in short for convenience is referred to the mindfulness meditation, not the mantra meditation. During the Buddha time, although many people may experience with the practice of mantra meditation before, but when listening to the Buddha about having a mindfulness in practice, then they could incorporate a mindfulness into the meditation right away, and after then pursuing into an insight observation to gain wisdom. The Buddha modified the traditional Brahman, mantra, meditation by incorporating the component of mindfulness into the meditation practice and carrying on the mindfulness through the meditation practice of the mindfulness meditation. The main difference between the Brahman, mantra meditation and the Buddhist mindfulness meditation is the component of mindfulness during the practice. That is, In the mantra meditation, practitioner will force the mind to focus on a specific word with supernatural power before getting into a one-pointedness state of the deep meditation of absorption, and then utilizing the meditation to suppress the defilements, while in the mindfulness meditation practitioner will empower the state of mindfulness, and then cleansing all the disturbing subjects within the mind so that the mind eventually becomes relaxed and reaching into the deep meditation of mindfulness absorption. As a result, the main difference between the mantra absorption and the mindfulness absorption is that, in mantra absorption the mind will sink into the subliminal consciousness, while in the mindfulness absorption the mindfulness will improve to be the purified mindfulness with no bias on any object of consciousness. The Buddha innovated this special mindfulness meditation technique to improve the mind to be able to perform the insight observations to gain wisdom for the knowledge of Buddha enlightenment. The Buddha began the enlightenment journey on that day by performing the meditation as usual. However, what made that day so special was the incident of his reminding of the mindfulness breathing that he used to practice when he was young, and he noticed that the mindfulness would help the mind to have a clear insight on the mind, as the Buddha explained as follows.
After the meal I, the Buddha, sit down, folding my legs crosswise, setting my body erect, and establishing mindfulness. Abandoning longing for the world, ill will, hatred, compassionate for the welfare of all living beings, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, doubt, respectively, I dwell with mind free from all these 5 hindrances, the 5 lower fetters. Before the enlightenment, when I, the Buddha, perform the mindfulness meditation, what the most troublesome that bothers the mind is the sensual pleasure, although there is no such desire at the present and the future, but still the mind thinks of the sensual pleasure of the past. I suggest to you, his students, that you must have a mindfulness, and the mindfulness will protect the mind from any sensual pleasures within the mind.
Now the mind is thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability. He directs it to knowledge of having mindfulness of the recollection of pasts. Then, by having all the history of every phenomenon, he directs it to the analysis of the ceasing and rebirth of phenomena in life, and he understands how beings reborn, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, and pass away on according to their actions. Then he directs it to knowledge of the destruction of the taints, mental intoxication. He understands as it really is. This is sufferings. This is the origin of sufferings. This is the cessation of sufferings. This is the way leading to the cessation of the taints. The mind is liberated from taints of desire for sensual pleasure, from the taint of existence, and from the taint of ignorance. There comes the knowledge, it is liberated, birth is destroyed, the spiritual life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming back to any state of being. This is called enlightenment.
While the sun was still shining above, the great being thus dispersed Mara's army, being honored with the offerings in the form of the young leaves from the Bodhi tree falling on his robe, as though with shoots of red coral. The Buddha entered into the knowledge of previous existence in the first watch of the night. In the second watch he purified his divine eyes, and in the final watch gained an insight into the knowledge of the interdependent causal origins. The Buddha gained the knowledge of understanding how beings reborn, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, and pass away on according to their actions. The Buddha gained the knowledge of the ceasing and rebirth of beings. In the third watch, as he continued to reflect on the nature of the causal antecedents, which consist of 12 constituents of the process of dependent origination, in their direct and inverse relations in progressive and regressive evolution, the 10,000 world systems quaked 12 times up to the very limits of the ocean. After the final watch of that night, the Buddha gained the wisdom of knowing how to cease the finest defilements, taints.
Scientifically speaking, the enlightenment is the way to gain knowledge of the truths of life within nature, so-called the law of nature, by having an insight observation on arising mental phenomena within a mind. This insight observation reveals an insight characteristics of mind when having a consciousness that it is impermanent, deteriorating, and no self, and if extending the observation, then realizing the dependent origination of these phenomena in a certain pattern of mind processing. So-called an operating system of mind in terms of the process of dependent origination. And by having a mindfulness to observe several rounds of the process of dependent origination, then the Buddha gained the knowledge of previous existence as a collective historical existence of an individual being. And when having sufficient information of existence, birth, and death of all beings, then the Buddha gained the knowledge of the ceasing and rebirth of beings, thus the law of karma. And when reviewing the whole process of dependent origination, then the Buddha discovered that the suffer origination of all mankind was caused by an error in mind processing, so-called the finest fetter or defilement at craving, clinging, and ignorance of the process of dependent origination, and then by applying the Four Noble Truth strategy to resolve an arising problem at the three particular stages, and then the Buddha gained the wisdom of knowing how to cease the finest defilements, taints, within the mind processing. The Buddha gained the knowledge of the nature of arising phenomena, and the process of dependent origination, and the wisdom of knowing how to cease all the finest defilements, taints, including the application of the Four Noble Truth for the cessation of the taint of desire for sensual pleasure at craving. The application of the Four Noble Truth for the cessation of the taint of existence of the five aggregates subject to clinging. The application of the Four Noble Truth for the cessation of the taint of ignorance at ignorance. In conclusion, the enlightenment of the Buddha could be summarized into four major application knowledge to study, namely the law of cause and effect, the process of dependent origination, the Four Noble Truths, and the nirvana.